The emergency call came in at 7:42 a.m. Three children are missing from our foster home. Emma, age 8, Sarah, age 10, Jessica, age 12. The Martinez sisters had been placed at Meadowbrook just 6 months earlier, finally together after years in the system. They'd grown to trust their new family, made friends at school, even talked about adoption. Then they were gone. What investigators found 39 years later beneath the floorboards would reveal that some disappearances aren't accidents. They're carefully orchestrated plans. March 14th, 1985. Springfield, Oregon. Detective Ray Morrison pulled into the driveway of 1247 Elm Street at exactly 8:15 a.m. The Meadowbrook foster home sat like a postcard picture of American dreams. White colonial with blue shutters, manicured lawn, children's bicycles scattered on the front porch. But the frantic woman who met him at the door told a different story. Margaret Whitmore, the foster mother, was still in her bathrobe, hands shaking as she clutched a cold cup of coffee. "I went to wake them for school," she stammered. "Their beds. They were empty, still made, like they never slept in them." Morrison followed her up the carpeted stairs to room 7. 3 twin beds arranged neatly against floral wallpaper. Pink comforters folded with military precision. Not a single item out of place. "Did you hear anything during the night?" Morrison asked, examining the window. It was locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry. "Nothing," Margaret whispered. "I'm a light sleeper. I would have heard footsteps, voices, anything." The detective knelt beside Emma's bed, the smallest one near the door. On the nightstand sat a half-finished letter in crayon. "Dear Santa," it began in shaky 8-year-old handwriting, "thank you for giving me my sisters back. Can we stay together forever?" Morrison's chest tightened. These weren't just missing children. They were kids who'd finally found stability, safety, hope. Someone had taken that away. By noon, the house was crawling with investigators. The Oregon State Police had cordoned off a 3-block radius. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks, whispering theories, clutching their own children a little tighter. Detective Morrison interviewed the Whitmores separately in the kitchen, while forensic technicians processed the girls' bedroom. Harold Margaret's husband worked nights as a security guard at the local lumber mill. He'd left for work at 10 p.m. the previous night, returned home at 6:30 a.m. "The girls were quiet at dinner," he recalled, his weathered hands gripping a coffee mug. "Emma asked if we could adopt them. We said we were thinking about it. They seemed so happy." Margaret's story never wavered through 3 separate interviews. She'd checked on the girls at 9 p.m. All 3 were asleep. Emma had asked for an extra blanket. Sarah was reading a library book about horses. Jessica was writing in her diary. Everything was normal, peaceful, safe. She woke at 7 a.m. to make breakfast, discovered their absence at 7:30, called police 12 minutes later. No inconsistencies, no red flags, just 3 children who'd vanished without a trace from a locked house in the middle of the night. The Martinez sisters had a complicated history that made their disappearance even more heartbreaking. Emma, Sarah, and Jessica had been separated for 2 years before placement at Meadowbrook. Their biological parents, Miguel and Carmen Martinez, had lost custody due to chronic neglect and substance abuse. The state had found the children living in squalor: no electricity, spoiled food, dirty clothes. The girls had been malnourished, showing signs of emotional trauma and developmental delays. Emma, the youngest, had stopped talking entirely. Sarah suffered from severe anxiety and nightmares. Jessica, trying to parent her younger sisters, had become withdrawn and aggressive. Social services separated them, believing individual placement would provide better therapeutic opportunities. Emma had been with the Hendersons, a family in Portland who specialized in younger children with developmental issues. They worked patiently, with her selective mutism, using play therapy and art to help her communicate. Sarah lived with Carol Jenkins, a single foster mother in Eugene who was a retired elementary school counselor. Carol understood trauma and gave Sarah the emotional support she desperately needed. Jessica, the oldest and most damaged, had been placed with the Thompsons in Bend, nearly 3 hours away. The Thompsons had experience with aggressive children and provided structure Jessica needed to heal. The sisters only saw each other during supervised visits once every 2 months at the state office in Salem. These reunions were bittersweet. The girls would cling to each other, cry when separated, and spend weeks afterward asking when they could be together again. Social worker Linda Reeves documented their interactions carefully, noting how dramatically their behavior improved when they were together. Emma would speak freely with her sisters. Sarah's anxiety diminished. Jessica's anger melted away, replaced by protective love. "These girls need each other," Linda wrote in her September 1984 report. Separation trauma is evident in all three. Emma exhibits selective mutism that disappears around her sisters. Sarah has developed severe anxiety that manifests as physical symptoms when discussing family separation. Jessica shows signs of depression and anger management issues that resolve when she's with her siblings. Individual therapy has reached its limits. Placement together at Meadowbrook Foster Home is strongly recommended for psychological stability and continued healing. The Whitmores had agreed immediately to take all three girls. Harold and Margaret had fostered dozens of children over 15 years, specializing in sibling groups that needed to stay together. Their home was licensed for up to 6 children, though they rarely took more than 4 at once. They understood the unique challenges of traumatized siblings and had successfully reunited other separated families. The Martinez girls arrived at Meadowbrook in September 1984, scared but hopeful. The first month was difficult. Nightmares, separation anxiety when the girls went to different classrooms, fear that they'd be split up again. But gradually, they began to heal. Emma started speaking in full sentences again, her vocabulary expanding daily. Sarah's grades improved dramatically as her anxiety decreased. Jessica joined the school basketball team and made friends for the first time in years. They shared a bedroom by choice, their beds arranged so they could see each other. They did homework together at the kitchen table. Margaret taught them to bake cookies. Harold helped Jessica with her jump shot in the driveway. For 6 months, they were just normal kids with a normal family. They talked about Christmas plans, summer vacations, maybe getting a dog. The Whitmores had started the adoption paperwork. Then they were gone. The initial investigation consumed 3 months and involved over 40 officers from multiple agencies. Detective Morrison coordinated with the Oregon State Police, FBI, and neighboring county sheriff's departments to create the largest missing persons operation in Springfield's history. They established a command center in the high school gymnasium, staffed 24 hours a day with volunteers answering phones and coordinating search efforts. Police canvassed a 10-mile radius, going door to door with photographs of the girls, interviewing every resident, checking every garage, shed, and outbuilding. They organized volunteer search parties that combed through the Willamette National Forest, calling the girls' names until their voices were hoarse. Local businesses posted flyers. Radio stations broadcast descriptions every hour. Television news ran nightly updates showing empty swings in the backyard where the girls used to play. They interviewed hundreds of people. Teachers, classmates, bus drivers, store clerks who might have seen the girls. They checked security cameras from every business within a 20-mile radius, looking for any sign of the Martinez sisters or unusual activity. They dragged the Mackenzie River twice with sonar equipment, searching for bodies they prayed they wouldn't find. Helicopters with thermal imaging scoured the Cascade foothills, looking for heat signatures in caves or abandoned structures. Bloodhounds tracked scents that led nowhere, sometimes to the school, sometimes to friends' houses, sometimes just into the wind. The FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team joined the search after 72 hours, bringing federal resources and behavioral analysts. They developed profiles of potential suspects, analyzed victimology patterns, cross-referenced similar cases nationwide. Nothing matched. No similar disappearances of sibling groups. No credible sightings despite thousands of tips. No ransom demands. No evidence of foul play. The Martinez sisters had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind only questions, heartbreak, and a community that would never be the same. Detective Morrison became obsessed with the case in a way that worried his colleagues and destroyed his personal relationships. He worked 18-hour days, following every lead no matter how remote. He interviewed every teacher at Riverside Elementary School where the girls attended classes. He spoke with their classmates, looking for mentions of strangers, unusual conversations, or plans the girls might have made. He talked to neighbors repeatedly, asking if they'd remembered anything new, noticed any unfamiliar vehicles, heard any unusual sounds. He questioned delivery drivers, utility workers, postal carriers, anyone who might have been in the neighborhood regularly. He reviewed the Whitmore's background with microscopic detail, financial records, employment history, references from the 37 previous foster children who'd lived in their home. He interviewed former foster children, now adults, asking about their experiences. Every single one praised the Whitmores as caring, protective parents who'd helped them heal and move forward with their lives. Never a single complaint or incident. No allegations of abuse, neglect, or inappropriate behavior. Morrison expanded his investigation beyond Springfield, checking missing persons reports across the Pacific Northwest for similar cases. He contacted law enforcement agencies in California, Washington, Idaho, and Nevada, looking for patterns. He reviewed every case involving missing children from foster care, looking for connections. He studied trafficking routes, known predators, organized crime activities. He developed theories about stranger abduction, family abduction by distant relatives, even the possibility that the girls had run away together and met with foul play. Each theory led nowhere. Each lead ended in disappointment. The case consumed Morrison's life. His marriage to Linda, his high school sweetheart, crumbled under the pressure. She begged him to take time off, to see a counselor, to remember that he had a family of his own that needed him. But Morrison couldn't let go. He saw Emma's crayon letter every time he closed his eyes. He heard Margaret Whitmore's sobs when she talked about losing her girls. He felt responsible for bringing them home. His health declined from stress and sleepless nights. Other cases piled up on his desk while he chased shadows and false leads. His captain ordered him to take other assignments, but Morrison couldn't focus on anything else. By Christmas 1985, after 9 months of investigation, the Martinez sisters had become cold case file number 7439, boxed and stored in the basement of the Springfield Police Department. The active investigation was officially suspended, though Morrison continued working the case on his own time. He kept their photographs on his desk for the next 13 years until his retirement. He never stopped believing they were alive somewhere. He never stopped hoping for the phone call that would bring them home. But the call never came. Years passed like pages turning in a book no one wanted to read. Detective Morrison retired in 1998. The Martinez case his only unsolved major investigation. He'd cleared dozens of other cases, earned commendations for his work, trained younger detectives, but the 3 missing girls remained his greatest failure. Margaret Whitmore died in 2003 of cancer, still keeping the girls' bedroom exactly as they'd left it. Harold followed in 2007, his heart broken by losing both his wife and the children he'd hoped to adopt. The Meadowbrook foster home was sold to a young couple who converted it into apartments, trying to create new memories in rooms that held too much sorrow. Emma would have been 39 in 2016, Sarah 41, Jessica 43, old enough to have children of their own, careers, lives full of the milestones stolen from them in childhood. Their biological parents, Miguel and Carmen, never recovered from losing their daughters twice, first to their own addictions and failures, then to whatever evil had taken them from the only safe place they'd known. The case was featured on America's Most Wanted twice, in 1987 and 1995. Host John Walsh spoke passionately about the three sisters who'd finally been reunited only to disappear. The show generated hundreds of tips: sightings in truck stops, fast food restaurants, shopping malls across the country. Every tip was investigated, every lead followed up, every possibility checked. Nothing credible ever emerged. Unsolved Mysteries featured the case in 1992, recreating that terrible morning when Margaret Whitmore found empty beds. The episode showed actors playing the girls, their faces deliberately obscured to protect their privacy in case they were still alive. Again, tips flooded in. Again, every lead led nowhere. Local news stations ran retrospectives every March 14th, keeping the story alive in public memory. The Springfield Register Guard wrote annual updates, interviewing investigators, family members, anyone who remembered the Martinez sisters. But as years passed, the articles got shorter, the updates less frequent, the hope more distant. Tips continued to pour in periodically over the decades: sightings in other states, theories about trafficking rings, claims from psychics who insisted they could communicate with the girls, conspiracy theorists who believed the government was involved. Morrison, even in retirement, followed up on anything that seemed remotely credible. He traveled to California to interview a woman who claimed to have seen the girls at a gas station in 1987. He flew to Texas to check out a tip about three sisters living on a ranch. He drove to Idaho to investigate a cult that allegedly kidnapped children. Every trip ended in disappointment. Nothing credible, nothing actionable, nothing that brought the Martinez sisters home. Dr. Amanda Foster wasn't looking for a cold case when she purchased 1247 Elm Street in March 2024. The house had been empty for 6 months after the previous tenants moved out, tired of living with the property's notorious history. Amanda, a pediatric surgeon at Sacred Heart Medical Center, wanted a quiet neighborhood close to the hospital. She worked long hours in the children's cardiac unit and needed a peaceful place to recover from the emotional demands of her job. The real estate agent, Jennifer Walsh, mentioned the house's history during their walkthrough, but assured Amanda that the notoriety had faded. Most of the neighbors were new residents who'd moved in long after the disappearance. The house had changed hands several times, each family hoping to create happier memories than the tragic ones that had occurred there. Amanda didn't mind the house's dark past. She'd spent her career helping children heal from trauma, and she believed in giving old places new purposes, fresh starts, second chances. If anything, she felt honored to care for a space where 3 children had been loved, even if they'd ultimately been lost. The house needed extensive renovations after decades of neglect and multiple owners who couldn't afford proper maintenance. Original hardwood floors were warped from decades of wear and water damage from leaking pipes. The kitchen appliances dated to the 1980s and barely functioned. Plumbing from the 1970s leaked sporadically, leaving water stains on ceilings and walls. Electrical systems hadn't been updated since the Clinton administration, with outlets that sparked and lights that flickered unpredictably. The basement was damp and musty, filled with abandoned belongings from previous tenants who'd left in haste. Amanda hired Morrison Construction, no relation to the detective who'd worked the case, to handle the major renovation work, while she tackled cosmetic improvements herself. Jake Morrison was a third-generation contractor whose grandfather had built many of Springfield's post-war homes. He understood old house construction and took pride in preserving historical character while updating systems for modern living. Jake had heard about the Martinez sisters, of course. Everyone in Springfield over a certain age remembered the case, but he approached the renovation professionally, focusing on structural integrity and building codes rather than dwelling on the past. The discovery that would change everything happened on June 18, 2024, during what should have been routine plumbing work. Jake Morrison was installing new water lines in the basement when his jackhammer hit something unexpected. "I was breaking through the foundation wall to run pipes to the upstairs bathroom," he later told reporters. "The concrete was thicker than normal, about 8 inches instead of the standard 4. When I finally broke through, there was a hollow space behind it." Jake shut off his equipment and called Dr. Foster downstairs. Together, they used flashlights to peer through the hole he'd created. Behind the foundation wall was a tunnel, not a crack or natural gap, but a deliberate construction. Hand-carved, roughly 4 feet high and 3 feet wide, stretching into darkness beyond their flashlight beams. The walls were smooth, carved from hard-packed earth and shored up with wooden support beams. This wasn't a natural formation or amateur excavation. This was professional construction, purposeful and deliberate, built to last. Amanda immediately called the Springfield Police Department. Lieutenant Sarah Chen arrived within 20 minutes, followed by the county forensics team and structural engineers from the state. What they found beneath the Meadowbrook foster home would redefine everything investigators thought they knew about the Martinez sisters' disappearance and expose one of the most sophisticated criminal operations in Oregon history. The tunnel system was extensive, connecting not just to the house's basement, but extending in multiple directions through the neighborhood like the root system of some massive underground tree. One branch led east toward Riverside Elementary School, where the Martinez sisters had attended classes. Another headed north to the old Springfield Youth Center, a facility that had provided after-school programs in the 1980s. A third tunnel connected to the basement of Sacred Heart Methodist Church on Maple Street, where the Whitmores had attended Sunday services. But the main tunnel, the largest and most carefully constructed, led directly to 1356 Oak Street, a house that had belonged to Dr. Vernon Ashcroft in 1985. Dr. Vernon Ashcroft. The name sent chills through veteran officers who remembered the original investigation. Ashcroft had been interviewed twice during the Martinez sisters' case, once as a potential resource and once as a routine check of professionals who worked with the girls. A child psychologist who specialized in treating traumatized youth, he'd been considered briefly as someone who might provide insight into the girls' psychological state or possible behaviors. But he'd been quickly dismissed as a suspect when his alibi checked out completely. He'd been attending a professional conference in Seattle the night the girls vanished, with hotel receipts, restaurant charges, conference registration, and dozens of professional witnesses to corroborate his whereabouts. Multiple colleagues remembered having dinner with him, attending his presentation on childhood trauma recovery, and seeing him at the hotel bar until nearly midnight. Ashcroft had also been the psychologist who'd evaluated the Martinez sisters for placement at Meadowbrook Foster Home. His recommendation had been instrumental in reuniting them with the Whitmores. He'd conducted their initial trauma assessments, monitored their progress during the first few months, and filed glowing reports about their adaptation to family life and their remarkable healing process when kept together. Lieutenant Chen contacted the FBI's Cold Case Task Force immediately. Special Agent Maria Vasquez arrived from Portland with a team of specialists in historical investigations, archaeological recovery, and digital forensics. Vasquez had 20 years of experience with cold cases and had seen some of the worst humanity had to offer. But even she was unprepared for what they would discover over the next 6 weeks. The investigation that followed would expose one of the most sophisticated child trafficking networks in American history and reveal how trusted community institutions had been infiltrated and manipulated by predators who understood exactly how to exploit the system designed to protect children. The tunnel system beneath Springfield wasn't built in months or even years. Carbon dating of wood samples and analysis of construction techniques suggested the project had begun in the late 1970s and continued through the mid-1980s. This was a decade-long undertaking involving multiple properties, carefully planned and expertly executed. The engineering was sophisticated. The tunnels were equipped with ventilation systems that prevented carbon dioxide buildup, electrical lighting powered by illegally tapped utility lines, and sound-dampening materials that would muffle voices, crying, or screams. Drainage systems prevented flooding during Oregon's rainy seasons. The passages were wide enough for adults to move comfortably while carrying unconscious children. Entry points were hidden behind false walls, removable floor sections, and concealed basement panels that could be operated from both sides. Agent Vasquez's team began the painstaking process of excavating and documenting the tunnel system. Using ground-penetrating radar and archaeological techniques, they mapped the entire network before beginning excavation. The main hub was located beneath Dr. Ashcroft's former residence, with secondary chambers that had served different purposes. 3 feet beneath the main passage connecting to the Meadowbrook foster home, they found the first evidence chamber, a waterproof plastic container, military-grade and designed for long-term storage, held documents that had been sealed for nearly 40 years. The contents would shock investigators and reveal the scope of an operation that went far beyond 3 missing children. Medical records, detailed psychological evaluations, transportation logs with dates, times, and routes, financial records showing payments received from buyers across the country, and photographs, hundreds of them, meticulously organized and labeled, showing children in various states of distress, fear, and trauma. Emma, Sarah, and Jessica Martinez appeared in 17 of those photographs, taken over a period of several weeks after their disappearance. The images showed them in what appeared to be underground chambers, wearing different clothing than what they'd been wearing when they vanished. Some photos were time-stamped weeks after their reported disappearance, proving that the Martinez sisters hadn't died the night they vanished. They'd been held, hidden, and processed through a system that operated beneath the notice of law enforcement for years. Dr. Vernon Ashcroft had died in 1994, taking his secrets to the grave. But the documents found in the tunnel revealed the horrifying scope of his operation and the clinical precision with which it had been conducted. Working with a network of foster parents, social workers, transportation coordinators, and buyers, Ashcroft had been systematically identifying vulnerable children for what he euphemistically termed specialized placement. The Martinez sisters weren't his first victims. They weren't his last. Between 1979 and 1986, at least 23 children who'd been evaluated by Dr. Ashcroft had subsequently disappeared from foster homes, group facilities, or temporary placements. Most were siblings, children whose disappearances could be attributed to runaways or family abductions rather than stranger kidnapping. Children the system was already failing, whose absence wouldn't trigger intensive federal investigations or massive media attention. The network operated with clinical precision that would have impressed corporate executives. Dr. Ashcroft would identify suitable candidates during routine psychological evaluations, looking for specific criteria that made children valuable to buyers: age, appearance, trauma history that made them compliant, and lack of extended family who might ask questions. Foster parents like the Whitmores, unwitting participants who genuinely cared for the children, would provide temporary stability while plans were finalized. The children would be allowed to heal just enough to become attractive to buyers, but not long enough to form unbreakable bonds with their foster families. Then, using the tunnel system, children would be removed from homes without alerting the foster families, who would wake up to empty beds and genuine confusion about what had happened. The tunnels led to staging areas where children would be prepared for transport to buyers across the country. Medical examinations ensured they were healthy. Psychological conditioning broke down resistance and taught compliance. Documentation was created for new identities. The Martinez sisters had been held in underground chambers for nearly 2 months while buyers were located and arrangements finalized. Their trail, according to the recovered documents, led to a compound in rural Idaho where they were separated for the first time since their reunion. Emma was sold to a family in Houston who wanted a young domestic worker. Sarah went to buyers in Phoenix who specialized in children with specific trauma histories. Jessica, being older and more resistant, was moved between multiple buyers before being placed with a family in Denver. Agent Vasquez's investigation expanded nationwide as the full scope of the network became clear. Using documents recovered from the tunnel system, federal agents identified network participants in 12 states. Foster care workers who'd provided insider information about vulnerable children in exchange for substantial payments. Transportation coordinators who'd moved victims across state lines using legitimate-looking family vehicles and forged documentation. Safe house operators who'd provided temporary holding facilities disguised as legitimate businesses or residential properties, and buyers, wealthy individuals who'd purchased children for purposes that ranged from domestic servitude to sexual exploitation to illegal adoptions for families who couldn't qualify through legitimate channels. The Springfield discovery, as media outlets called it, became the largest cold case breakthrough in Oregon history and exposed systemic failures in foster care oversight that had allowed the network to operate undetected for years. Congressional hearings were called. Child protection laws were strengthened. Background check requirements were expanded. But for Agent Vasquez and her team, the priority was finding the victims who might still be alive. The search for Emma, Sarah, and Jessica Martinez became a nationwide manhunt involving federal agents, local police, social workers, and victim advocates. Using the detailed records found in Ashcroft's tunnel system, investigators traced the girls' movements from Springfield through Idaho and into 3 different states. Emma Martinez was located in November 2024, living under an assumed identity as a domestic worker in Houston, Texas. She'd been sold to a family who'd moved her repeatedly to avoid detection, finally settling in Texas in the early 1990s when she was considered old enough to be trusted not to run away. Emma had no memory of her sisters or her time at Meadowbrook Foster Home. Trauma specialists believe she'd developed dissociative amnesia as a survival mechanism to cope with her experiences. She'd lived for 39 years not knowing her real name or that anyone was looking for her. Sarah was found 2 weeks later in Phoenix, Arizona, living independently but struggling with severe PTSD and substance abuse issues that had plagued her adult life. Unlike Emma, Sarah remembered fragments of their captivity, the tunnels, the underground rooms, the fear and confusion of being separated from her sisters. But she'd been told by her captors that her sisters were dead and that she'd be killed too if she ever tried to contact anyone from her past. She'd spent decades believing she was the sole survivor of whatever had happened to them. When FBI agents showed up at her door with proof that Emma and Jessica were alive, Sarah collapsed from shock and relief. Jessica, the oldest and most protective of her sisters, had been the most difficult to locate. She'd been moved between 6 different buyers as she proved too resistant and traumatized to be useful for their purposes. At 16, she'd aged out of the network's interest and been abandoned in Denver with false identification and no resources. She'd spent the last 20 years building a new identity from nothing, working multiple jobs to put herself through nursing school, and eventually starting her own family. She'd married a kind man named David Chen, who knew only that she'd grown up in foster care and had trauma she didn't like to discuss. They had 2 children, teenagers now, who had no idea their mother had been a missing child whose disappearance had made national news. The reunion of the Martinez sisters took place on December 15th, 2024, at Sacred Heart Medical Center in Springfield, the same hospital where Dr. Amanda Foster worked, whose renovation had uncovered the truth. The timing felt symbolic, as if the universe had conspired to bring the sisters home to the place where their story had begun. Emma, now 39, met Sarah, 41, and Jessica, 43, for the first time in nearly 4 decades. The reunion was private, facilitated by trauma specialists and federal victim advocates who understood the complex emotions involved. None of the sisters spoke publicly about their experiences, but victim services coordinators confirmed they were receiving ongoing support and counseling. The case had given them answers, closure, and each other. It couldn't give them back the childhoods that had been stolen or erase the trauma they'd endured, but it offered something they'd never expected to find: justice, truth, and the family they'd never stopped hoping to see again. Dr. Vernon Ashcroft's network had finally been exposed to the light. Federal prosecutors filed charges against 11 surviving members of the trafficking ring, ranging from conspiracy to kidnapping to human trafficking. Harold and Margaret Whitmore were posthumously cleared of any involvement. They'd been unknowing participants, genuinely caring foster parents who'd been manipulated by a system they trusted. Detective Ray Morrison, now 82 years old and living in a retirement community outside Eugene, was present when the charges were announced. The case that had consumed his career, haunted his retirement, and challenged his faith in justice had finally been solved. The Martinez sisters were alive. The truth had survived 4 decades of burial, and the darkness that had hidden beneath Springfield for nearly 40 years had finally been brought into the light, ensuring that no other children would disappear into those tunnels ever again.